What's good, everybody? Welcome to Origin Story, the podcast that interviews creators about where they came from to understand how they got here. But this isn't that show. Ben and I are trying out a new concept for a little side project we're going to do in relation to the other episodes we're releasing, and we're calling it Study Hall. And Ben, how about you tell them a little bit about what this is all about?
So, Phil, we've been running a lot of analytics on the show, and I think what we've come up with, folks are really going to like this. This is an unexplored thing in the podcast marketplace. We're calling it just two guys talking about stuff they like.
Two bros, two beers.
Yeah, I mean, like the pause there, I think when we edit this, we'll put in a little applause track is my thought.
Yeah, there has no podcast currently with us two guys talking about absolutely nothing for 3 hours long or however long it is, and putting it out into the world.
But we're gonna boldly go ahead. Listen, the detractors are already booing, but you know what? We're gonna step into this and just talk about stuff we like for 15 to 20 minutes. And if you're still here at the end, that's nice.
Yeah, 100%. I think, like, in all seriousness, Ben and I, we are always playing, reading, watching, listening, a bunch of stuff that doesn't make it onto the show in terms of like the interviews that we're doing. And we also have a lot of friends that are interested in the same things and writing about the same things or doing videos about the same things. And we kind of wanted to open up a space for those kinds of conversations to happen. So, like, with this kind of concept, we're just thinking of, like, in addition to our bi-weekly interviews where we have creators come on and talk about their creative journeys, this could kind of just be like, hey, one of our friends or somebody that we admire has written maybe a piece of criticism about a video game or a film. What if we had them come on and we can just have a little bit of a conversation around the piece? Or like maybe we all saw a recent film or played a game. What if we all just kind of came on, had somebody else who isn't part of the show come on, and we can just have a little discussion about that work and, hopefully have some fruitful conversations about it.
Yeah, I think like finding a space for both the fully baked, talking about an essay, some kind of criticism that we really like and are really kind of talking about, or, a lot of the times, Phil, what happens is you and I will play something around the same time. Sometimes we're like, oh, we can try to get an interview and it won't come through, but we're still like, there's something interesting to talk about here that like is stuck in our craw, and you kind of just want to get off your chest. And so I think we want to find a place for that, just, both for us, but for all the people that we talk to and read on a regular basis.
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of like I've been saying to Ben, it's almost like an audio newsletter or something like that. It's just kind of like this chance for us to kind of give a little bit of an idea of what we're doing outside of the show in terms of the things that we're, consuming, and just talk a little bit about them. Like recently, I think Ben and I, we just had a conversation with somebody who's going to be on the show soon, and they were telling us about William Gibson and how Gibson kind of influenced a lot of the work that they're doing right now. And that kind of got Ben and I to just start reading a bunch of Gibson again, which I don't think either of us have done since like college. And that's been super fun.
Yeah, it's been a blast. So I feel like on a future show, we'll be talking about Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive. And what did I just pick up the other day? It has to do with, hold on, pattern recognition. That's what it is.
Is that like one of those newer ones?
Yeah. I think that's one of his newer ones. So we're going full Gibson, not today, but at some point. Today, though, Phil, yeah. I think we're going to talk about Dark Souls.
We're talking about Dark Souls, and we're talking about kind of all these things wrapped up in Dark Souls, in that realm of like action, medieval adventure RPGs. But I think Dark Souls is a really fun one for us to jump into initially because, and Ben, feel free to correct the record, but if I recall correctly, you were like weren't really into Souls like the first couple times you tried it, and like Dark Souls, like I've been playing them since like Demon Souls came out. Like usually like upon release, I'd like buy the game and play through it. But if I recall, like I think you got the Switch version of Dark Souls maybe, and like you just kind of bounced off it the first time you played.
I bounced off it really hard, and not only did I bounce off it hard, but I became one of those nightmare people who builds a personality around being like, I can't really play FromSoft. It's just too hard for me. I think if you actually look at my bio on our website, it still has a thing about not being able to make it past the first demon in the first Dark Souls. Because I was like, I just can't do this. Like, this is just not possible. These games are so hard. I'm having a bad time. And why would I do this to myself? And I don't know. It like kind of ballooned from there. We've had a couple guests on the show. Namely, I'm thinking of Greg Kosovin, who made Hades. But I kind of copped on that show where I was like, I think I'm just bad at video games. I did not beat Hades. And Greg, like, more or less was like, what are you doing with your life? It's time to get it together. And then I think he kind of like talked about, I might even say bragged about beating Sekiro, where he was like, listen, I'm an old man. I beat Sekiro. You're a youth. Like, what are you doing with it? Like, get it together. Play one of these games.
Yeah. I think the thing that's interesting about it too is that you had like that really visceral kind of reaction to it the first couple times you tried playing the game. And we're going to get into it, but I mean, now you're a fucking Dark Souls FromSoft fiend. And I'm curious kind of what do you think was the switch, or like what was it that kind of eventually clicked with you that you were like, okay, actually these games are not only good, but good enough that like you've beaten Elden Ring like 3 times or something like that.
I think it's like 4 times now, not to like truly like put my just full brain damage, I think, is like what has happened. It's just like there's now nothing, and I think I've talked to you about this before, but it's like now there's like almost nothing that hits the same pleasure centers of the brain at this point beyond these FromSoft games, that it's like the squirt of serotonin that I get, unmatched, unparalleled. It is mostly coming from FromSoft. And I think the like inciting incident was, so the midst of the pandemic, things are, to be clear, dark. I moved to Indiana alone, and I was in this tiny little apartment. It was the dead of winter. I obviously moved in the middle of the pandemic, so I had like no friends down here. And I think you sent me right around that time your PS4. And so I was like, I have nothing to do. I get off work. I come home to this empty apartment. My girlfriend had not moved down at the time. And so I started playing Bloodborne. And again, similar thing where it was like, this is really hard. And then I started watching some guides from, I think it's like Fightin' Cowboy or whatever, who does all the kind of FromSoft games, and he does all these walkthroughs. And then something started to happen where I was like, this is fun. and what's fun about it is that the game is dark, and the game is mean to me, and the game, like treats me with a degree of like disrespect, that it's like, you're a worm and you don't deserve to beat this. And something about like being able then to continue and persevere and keep moving through it started to feel immaculate. Like it was just like, I felt amazing to be able to progress. And again, I think some of that is like, we can talk about game design. Like you are meant to beat those games on some level, right? Like these games are not meant to be truly impossible. People beat them all the time, but it I think gives you this feeling of rampant difficulty. And it gives you the feeling of, you're a piece of shit who shouldn't be playing this and isn't meant to beat it. That when you do achieve things, makes it feel incredible. And I think that high started to pay off so well. And I think we can also talk about, like, not to, Phil, like, cut me off at any moment here. But I think the other thing that's, like, really essential to those games is, like a degree of nihilism, right? That there's a degree of you are but a bug in the world, and the world hates you, but not you specifically. Like it's not a you're being targeted. It's a the world is an inhospitable place that doesn't care about you and can crush you unthinkingly. A lot of kind of Lovecraftian themes are bubbling up, but it's like, you know, you're just not meant to survive. You're not meant to be here. And I think that feeling, especially for me, and I know a lot of people in the middle of the pandemic felt like it came to the front, right? Where it was like, I was realizing, oh, my work doesn't really care about my existence. You know, there's no value to the things that I'm doing. It feels as though the world itself has no inherent meaning. And yet I want to still be able to survive this thing. And I think Dark Souls in some ways and Bloodborne and all those games really capture that feeling, but more than life, give you real payoffs for persevering and give you that squirt of you achieved something by continuing to survive. And that, I think, became incredibly addictive.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny that you bring up I forget the YouTuber or whatever that you're talking about that like that got you to finally understand like why maybe you liked the games or just kind of was able to present the games in a way that made you interested in continuing them. But I think that kind of like I'd almost call it like a community or like communal aspect of the whole series, I think at this point is also why I think I also got interested in it, because, you know, I bought Demon Souls on PS3 like back when it came out, and I liked it enough at the time, but it wasn't a game that I beat, and I certainly didn't even spend much time past like the first or second boss in it. And then Dark Souls had come out, and around that time there was this YouTuber named Epic Name Bro, and he started doing like a walkthrough series as like around the same time that the game was coming out, and just kind of like learning the game. And I started playing the game alongside him, and I like did the same like loadout as him, which he beat the game the first time, I want to say, with a longsword, like leveled up all the way. And I also beat the game the first time through like longsword, dex build, low HP, that kind of thing. And there was something about kind of having that communal feeling of like we're all failing at the game, but we're failing together. That was evocative, I think, at the time. And you know, a lot of people have talked about how the Souls games have that feeling that you might have of like more retro style games pre-internet, where you'd have to like talk to friends in order to figure out how to beat a certain section of a game, and how it kind of still scratches that itch. Something that I think I was telling either you or our friend Joe, and our friend Joe like still kind of hates the FromSoft games. Something I was mentioning in the chat one day was that, to me at least, the Souls games have an interesting quality to them in that, like when you're playing them, you can oftentimes bounce off when you're trying to do what you expect you should do in a game, you know, like mechanically. And something that clicked for me, and I think this is why I liked Epic Name Bros videos, was that watching somebody else play and kind of having that third person perspective allowed me to maybe more objectively or more easily understand the language of the game and like what I was supposed to do. And I think Bloodborne 2, like Blood-Starved Beast, I think is the perfect example of like that's a roadblock that a lot of people end up bouncing off the game from, and actually seeing it from a third person, seeing like when to dodge and like, you know, how the beast actually operates kind of takes away some of that ferality or that wildness of the AI, and allows you to be like, oh, this is actually something I can systemically understand. So I think the games have that really interesting quality to them, at least for me.
Yeah, no, I think the communal part is such a big part of it, not just when it comes to like the literal, like, how do I get from one stage to the next? Like, how do I get from one area to the next? Because I think a lot of it is like, it's really hard sometimes to figure out, well, what's the thing that I have to use on this boss? And like, what's the, you know, because sometimes bosses will be weak to fire, but it's like, it's never consistent. It feels like it'll be very strange sometimes, the particular weapon or the particular build that is like most effective. And someone has probably already figured that out, and you can kind of go watch a video. But even more than I think the other thing that is like really attractive to me is the way that the secrets of it and the lore of it, because I think the stories of each of these games can be also kind of really just like esoteric, really hard to nail down. They don't do a lot of cutscenes with talking where they're like, and like, here's the point of this thing that you're playing. So what that does is it's created this fan base who will, aggressively try to like mine every nook and cranny of these things to try to put together some kind of meaning and some kind of thread to the stories at hand. And I've become so addicted to these games and like what they have to say that I think like it's become more and more meaningful to like engage with these like just like 5-layer burrito threads where you're 8 pages down and someone's like offering their lore take and you're like, actually this rules and I love it and I really resonate with it. That there's something about like engaging with a thing that is both kind of difficult to play but also difficult to kind of parse and find meaning in, that like when you as a group are coming together to like come up with theories and find some kind of collective meaning together, it really starts hitting. Like it really, I think, resonates when it's like, well, okay. And again, I would even maybe put forward a thesis that in some ways that's like feels like something that these games do intentionally, which is they start from a place of kind of like abject nihilism, that it's like the world hates you and there is no meaning. And yet like there's something about working together with community to solve them, both from a story perspective and a gameplay perspective, that then I think moves towards an almost like existentialism, where it's like actually meaning and purpose is emergent and is something that we can build together.
Yeah, no, I think I really resonate with that. And, something that I appreciate about the franchise as a whole is kind of the fact that you could play them and like basically not give a shit about about any of the narrative beats. Like I think that's one place where we kind of deviate, where I think like the Dark Souls 1, that was one where like I kind of was more interested in the story. But the subsequent ones, like I'm just playing them because I like the gameplay. Like Dark Souls 3, I beat that game in like 2 days. Couldn't tell you anything about the story of it. But I like how like the games are structured and created in a way where you can kind of have that layered experience, where some people are going to come at it and they're not even going to like, I think Elden Ring actually is a perfect example. Like, I don't know about you, Ben, but for the most part, like I understand like the Ronnie storyline and like kind of where the game ends, but on a beat for beat basis, it's like I feel like most people aren't going to get through that game and really understand anything of what they just played, and unless they look it up, which I don't think is necessarily true for the older games, and maybe that just has to do a little bit with like the breadth of how big Elden Ring is. But something that I really appreciated specifically with Elden Ring, and it's true with the rest of the games, but I think Elden Ring is interesting because it's kind of the most like AAA feeling of them, like in terms of like it's like a huge open world. It has the big map and the things you can check off, although it's kind of the way it's presented isn't like an Ubisoft title. It still has, despite kind of having that huge breadth that you would get from these other open world games, it still has that kind of eccentricism that feels very much so like it has a singular vision. Although I realize hundreds of people worked on that game, and that's not to say that other titles like the Assassin's Creed franchise or like Horizon or whatever other open world AAA game, that's not to say that those games don't have that, or that there aren't these human touches within the fabric of those games. But I think in those titles, finding those moments where you can kind of feel like, oh, this is like somebody on the team was just like a weirdo and they like were able to fit this into the game, like those are oftentimes pushed to the margins of the experience. Those are like the side quests. I feel like just inherent to the DNA of all FromSoft games is you can kind of see that Miyazaki influence across the titles, no matter how many people work on them. And we don't need to get into all the ideas around like auteur theory and like how there's problematic aspects of that, but you also see this with a lot of other Japanese developers, like the Kojimas of the world. Like there's this kind of little aspects that, despite the fact that hundreds of people are working on them, it's almost a marvel that you can still kind of get that almost singular feeling ethos in them. And I think FromSoft hasn't lost that yet, despite the fact that now Elden Ring is like in the top 10 best-selling games in the United States of whatever the metric is. So it's just kind of a marvel, I think, in that sense.
Yeah, hugely popular. I definitely agree with you where it's like Elden Ring, I have watched a horrific number of hours of like lore videos from various people. I could not tell you like what is going on there. Like just truly have no idea. But I would say I feel like Dark Souls 3 and especially Sekiro probably have like the most cogent stories. And again, like we don't have to get into it because I think for our purposes it's not super important here. But feel like they are stories that are like really interested in cycles and like the importance of death, that endings are important and like letting things die is like a natural part of life, and that like the quest to kind of keep things alive and to want to be immortal is at the end of the day like a bad thing to strive for, which is I think something especially as we're in this moment where it's like feels like everything's getting a sequel, everything is a part of an extended universe, everything is and nothing ever truly dies. It's like I think those storylines where it's like actually letting things die, that's good, really resonates with me.
Yeah, 100%. I almost want to just cap it there for the FromSoft, because I'm like, we could have a whole podcast talking about like Elden Ring, and if you all want to hear more of our thoughts on that, then for sure. But like I think kind of my last thought on it is just like with Elden Ring specifically, that's like the first game in a long time, at least at a AAA scale, where I've just felt like when it came out, like so many people were still just finding things, and like to be like in that community as the game was coming out. And like one moment that just sticks into my head right off the bat, and it's one that I think I don't know if you can complete the game without seeing it, but it has the feeling of like you're discovering something that is completely unique, is like going and finding the underground city map underneath like you have like this whole map, and you're like, wow, this is a big game, and then you're like, oh shit, there's a whole nother map underneath. Like that feeling just felt so, it felt like kind of childlike, like that kind of discovery, which I wouldn't have expected in those kinds of games. Well, I think that I'm interested, Ben, in the Souls connection. So we're continuing on this journey of the Ben Thorpe arc of going from hating Souls to loving Souls, and then obviously if you're a fan of the Souls games, then you also realize just how much homages they have to the Berserk manga franchise. And I know this recently that you've kind of bought the first volume, and I think I've watched one of like the anime films of that series, but I honestly couldn't really tell you anything about it besides like it was really brutal. I'm curious, just like, what's your experience starting that, and are you kind of seeing the DNA start to seep into the FromSoft stuff as you're kind of reading that?
Yeah, I was just doing like a little bit of reading beforehand just to kind of understand. I think that, the Miyazaki has talked about how much inspiration he draws from Berserk. Berserk is this manga, came out in 1989, kind of classic sword and sorcery. You've got your anti-hero character who carries a sword that is, I would say, roughly twice the size of his body, and he's fighting demons. And like that is like, I think, in terms of jumping in, all you need to know. My initial impression, so I just kind of tore through the first volume. They sell these massive tomes. I think there's like 40 of them. But I just read the first one, and I think you can 100% see, exactly what I was talking about before, the kind of nihilism that you see in the Dark Souls series, this kind of feeling of being a tiny, small person fighting against impossible, massive, sometimes otherworldly odds. Is really, really important to the ethos of Berserk. But I'll also say, and, I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but I think my initial impression and feeling to some extent is that like they can be brutal to a point where sometimes I'm like, man, I don't know if I can do this. There's this crazy scene. This is like probably about halfway through the first tome, where Guts, who is the main character of Berserk, the guy with the big sword, kind of comes into this town that has been taken over by this mayor, who we kind of quickly learn is a demon or demon adjacent. And there is, I mean, these drawings are just like so graphic, and that's really kind of the thing that I've just like. There's an image that is seared into my brain because the mayor at one point basically like takes over another warrior, and he does it by like spitting out this like worm thing with a human face, and then it like comes out of his mouth and goes into the mouth of this other guy, and like the drawing is like one of the most horrific things I think I've ever like set my eyeballs on, and it was like it was one of those moments where I like finished reading that panel and I like put the book down and I was like, I need to take a walk, and just like got up and like walked out the door and like walked down the street and was like, where you're just like trying to fill your head with like any old thing. And so I don't know. I'm like, I think I'm struggling with it. I feel like it's a thing that I'm not gonna like run away from. Like I already bought the second volume, so like I'm gonna definitely keep going. But there have been moments where I'm like, that is the most like gut churning thing I have ever looked at.
Well, that's interesting. I feel like you almost answered what my question would be of like, why, and obviously you're still super early on, and I realize like this project has been going on for like 20 or 30 years or whatever, and more recently the creator just passed away, and they decided to continue the series. Just like, it sounds like you're saying that maybe the reason that people read it or maybe find a connection with it isn't just like, the art's like kind of really unique, and if you're into that kind of more brutal stuff, obviously you'll like it, but maybe there's this kind of underlying theme about like overcoming adversity and like these adverse circumstances when you're just like this small little speck in this world that's trying to destroy you, which I think a lot of people couldn't relate to these days.
It's there 100%. I think the thing that, I was feeling and I felt like what I was resonating with when I picked up Bloodborne, I think is absolutely here too, which is this conversation about like, well, what does it mean if you are in a universe that not only doesn't care about you, but like actively like has it in for you? And like, what does it mean to try to move through that place? And like, what does it turn you into? Guts, I think the main character is like pretty aggressively an anti-hero in a way that I feel like I haven't seen in a long time. I feel like we get a lot of like pseudo anti-heroes, like a Deadpool or whatever, who are like supposed to be, unlikable or like not truly heroic, but like they're basically like not very disagreeable, I would say. And this main character is like pretty actively, at least in the initial going, it'll tee up like, hey, you should save this person to do the right thing. And he'll be like, no, I don't care about that. Like, that's not of interest. My quest is for revenge and revenge only. And I don't care. There's a couple refrains about like despising humans because they're weak. And so, he's like definitely an unlikable character. And I think someone who you're not necessarily supposed to look at and be like, yeah, that guy rocks, even though he carries, you know, the biggest sword you've ever seen in your life. And so I think I'm again, like I'm finding that I resonate with that, the broader theme. We'll see how far that ends up carrying me.
For sure. No, I think that's interesting. I'd love to, you know, kind of continue this thread of just kind of getting your reactions as you go, because I think there is something evocative there of like, yeah, like you're saying with anti-heroes, we've kind of been conditioned at this point that like the anti kind of means like in most stories now it's like, oh, they kill people, but like they're still a hero, and like, you know, that's essentially as far as it goes. But what it seems like maybe this text is more interested in like, what do we do with somebody who is like pretty unsavory and is in these situations that kind of force people to be unsavory, like in these kind of war situations or like these, you know, these epic battles, and like how can we carry this through line of this character throughout and still make people want to read and you know, hope that this person survives, right? I think that's kind of like an interesting tension, because I imagine that as the story goes on, that Guts, you kind of see like these multiple layers of this character who's not just kind of like this beast, you know, like there's what's underneath.
Already, I think they've teed it up in ways where it's like, I think it's very clear that it's interested in, despite how horrific the world is, that you want to see a glimmer of something a little bit more humane. There's a scene where the mayor is kind of going to behead someone that kind of Guts meets along the way. And one of the characters, which is like a little fairy that follows him around, the fairy is like constantly like, yo, like, why are you being such an asshole? Like, what's your deal? And I think is supposed to be the reader insert in some ways, because the fairy is constantly like, hey man, like you should be nicer, or like you should be better. Like, what are you doing? Why are you making these decisions? And there's a scene where like Guts kind of comes to watch the kind of beheading, and the fairy's like, oh, so you're here to save him, and Guts is like, no, I'm just, it's obviously a trap, I'm not going to do anything. But then you have a moment kind of shortly thereafter where like Guts kind of breaks down, and it becomes clear that like he wants to be able to, but realizes that he isn't. And it's a very small moment of kind of humanity over this massive tome that I just devoured. But it's like, again, I think in the same ways that you can think about Souls doing this, it's like those tiny glimmers, I think, in the face of just like an unending slew of the weirdest, most horrifying shit you've ever seen, end up being so much more resonant because of the backdrop that they're in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, like I said, I think it'll be interesting depending on how long you end up sticking with it. I think one of the tensions that we always see with anime and manga, especially ones that are more directed toward like male readership. I don't think that Berserk is necessarily considered shonen, because that's more like for younger reader, like teenage or like preteen readers. But like, you know, it's very much so for like male readers. That the one of the tensions that we always see is that like these stories go on forever, right? And like, how do you keep that tension or keep that character interesting for so many chapters? And it sounds like for somebody like Guts, it's going to be interesting to see like what that trajectory is like, even if you only read like a couple of the volumes. Like, how do you keep that kind of storyline interesting if it's always just going to be like Guts goes somewhere, kills the demon, is an asshole, but maybe thinks like, maybe I shouldn't be an asshole for like a second. Like, that's not going to be that dynamic of a story, right? But it's a story that seems to be resonant with a lot of people, so I'm really curious kind of how that evolves.
Yeah, moving forward. Phil, should we try to squeeze in a little bit of Dragon's Dogma?
I mean, I don't think that you would let me get out of here without mentioning Dragon's Dogma.
You gotta talk to me about Dragon's Dogma. So you have been, I feel like, in a way that mirrors my own experience with Dark Souls. You have, played it, tried to play it, and have bounced off a couple times, and then, I wouldn't say a hater, but have said some, truly alarming things in the chat where I've been like, Dragon's Dogma, it's on sale for $6.99, $7.99. You're like, well, I only play good games, Ben.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'd say that our stories of yours with Souls and mine with Dragon's Dogma are complete analogous kind of things where, Dragon's Dogma, one of those games, I guess we can't even really call it a franchise. I guess there's two, technically. There's Dragon's Dogma and Dragon's Dogma Online, although that never got released in the West. That IP, I remember when it first came out on like PS3, Xbox 360, because one of my good friends, Sam, he was really into like Souls and stuff like that, and he just like devoured the original Dragon's Dogma on PS3, and he always just telling me like, oh, it's a really great game, you should check it out. I think I might have played it a little bit on PS3, bounced off of it, bought it again on Switch, bounced off of it, and I think like the big reason I was bouncing off of it was that, the game's kind of slow to start off, and it's set in this kind of fantasy Western medieval kind of setting, and like one of the things that's off the bat interesting, and I was saying to Ben off air, is this like Japanese developed game, plenty of fantasy medieval JRPGs out there, but this one is like really grounded and kind of medieval East, like European kind of aesthetic in ways that you don't even really see in most Western, fantasy medieval games. Like it's very much so, like I think I said to Ben, like for the first 30 levels, you're getting different varieties of like fucking tunics, like you're not getting like cool looking plated armor and things like that. And that's pretty fascinating because it feels like a game that's actually just very interested in that kind of time period in ways that I think a lot of Western games really aren't, even if it is like fantastical and there's dragons and ogres and all that shit. But the game kind of starts very slow, like you do like kind of fetch quest type stuff, and then like there's a horrible mission at the very start of the game,
like,
where you're
just nightmarish, unspeakably
like the escort mission is like one of the worst early missions I've ever played in a RPG. Like it's one of those things where like the game got a re-release under Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, and you would think that they were like, oh, we need to take this escort mission out. They were like, nah, welcome to the Thunderdome, you're doing it again.
I was cackling. I think you made the point, and I think it's one that you should. I'm going to force you to bring up again. That you were like, if you could look at the analytics of like who drops off the game at what point, you would see just a precipitous fall after that quest.
I mean, I don't have the data to back it up, but I am almost positive that must be the case. That there's just like, people start the game, and again, this mission is like in the first hour, depending on how quickly you read through the text or like what kind of other missions you do prior to this one, which essentially you do this mission as a way to get you to the first main city hub. But I just cannot imagine that most people are going to play that mission and be like, damn, I want to stick with this, because it's just like, it's just horrible in terms of how it's designed. It's really, really slow. And like it makes you like, you can't run that far ahead of the escort caravan, otherwise it stops completely and you have to go back, and then it like starts moving, and it's like this donkey that moves like, I don't know, like really fucking slow. But after you get through that, I think the game really opens up, and it, for people that haven't played it, it's kind of like it's an action RPG, so like you're putting in the inputs and fighting. It's not turn-based or anything like that, so like a Souls game kind of, or like a Monster Hunter type action game. And there's a variety of different classes you can be, from your classic swordsman to your mage to like your ranger who does like dual knives and bow and arrow type stuff. But it's like really dynamic combat system where you can kind of jump on these massive creatures like griffins and, like I said, ogres and stuff like that. And it's really fun. Like the combat is really, really interesting. And it kind of got me thinking of like, I was saying to Ben off air that it because Ben, like you've bounced off of Monster Hunter games in the past, and
can't do it. Don't have it in me.
Before hopping onto this call, I was just thinking like, because like the actual loop of the game is so much like Monster Hunter. Like you are basically fighting a lot of the same kind of creatures over and over again. But I think something that this game benefits from is like it has incorporated that kind of gameplay loop into just a sprawling open world in ways where it makes it feel a little bit more dynamic, because you can happen upon things as you're venturing from one quest to another, and like there's nothing new about that. Like that's kind of like a classic open world design. But I think it made me wonder, like, why hasn't Monster Hunter just kind of fully gone in this direction where instead of like it being mission based, it's this completely open world. You can go out into the field, you'll find your monsters that you need to slay to get the parts, and it just makes it feel a little bit more dynamic than what it is when you just actually like write it down. But yeah, I'm still super early into Dragon's Dogma, but for some reason it really clicked this time after I got past that escort mission. The combat is just so fun, and something that I was saying to Ben is that it has this whole system called the pawn system, and basically your pawns are like your NPC companions who follow you around and help you on missions. And you know, one thing that off the bat that's really interesting about this title is that the pawns aren't just a gameplay mechanic. There isn't ludonarrative dissonance between like the pawns as these entities that help you on quests and the actual world that you are inhabiting. Like the pawns are actually incorporated into the mythos of the world as these entities that are there to serve your character, who is like an arisen. And I don't know, it's just interesting how the story and like the overall design of the game has incorporated these NPCs in a way that, I mean, I don't know, Ben, how you felt after beating the game, but like the AI, it's not like the most advanced in the world, but how they kind of flavor it with like how they speak and how they interact with you is really kind of dynamic, despite the fact that it's not like that advanced.
Yeah, I feel like in a lot of ways they capture the feeling of like an MMO, but are like giving you your crew. It works. It works as a way for kind of moving through the world. I also think, and I know that like you're super early, and that game in some ways like sits on its story for hours and hours and hours before it starts kind of revealing what's going on. But I think it's worth like putting it in this conversation, because in a lot of ways I think it actually ends up being in conversation with a Dark Souls or with a Berserk, because it's a story, and this is not giving any way spoilers, that is also interested in kind of cycles and being trapped in cycles, and what it means to like be in a world that's like pretty bleak, and like how do you find meaning in it. But Dragon's Dogma, good.
It's good. It's good. I was wrong, man. I mean, like my last kind of pin on it would just be that, at least where I'm at in the story and like the world, I don't find that the actual open world aesthetically and, geographically is all that interesting yet. But what I would say is that what makes it kind of in conversation a lot of these games to me is it's a game that actually is interested in you traversing these spaces and like these spaces being hostile to you. It's not just like there's a dynamic weather system that you can throw in and like it rains and it really doesn't actually do anything to your overall experience. Like in this game, like the big kind of differentiator is that at nighttime it's like dark. Like if you don't have a light, it's gonna almost turn into like a horror action game where you can be attacked by like these creatures and you can barely see them, and stuff like that is really, really interesting, and it shows that they're kind of more interested in not only like how you get from point A to point B, but like how your characters are interfacing with the world and how the world interfaces with the broader context of the game in interesting ways, despite the fact that it's a PS3 era title. It's not like the geometry or like other aspects of the design are all that advanced, but like just thinking about like using light, for instance, as a kind of key factor in how you interact with the world, I find to be like really, really cool and really evocative.
Yeah, 100%. Phil,
So
do we do it? Is this the thing? All right.
yeah, I think we did it. I mean, like Ben and I said at the top of the show, I think for the future episodes, we're really interested in maybe having like somebody else come on, and it'll be kind of like pseudo interview conversation about a specific thing, while also, you know, talking about what we're interested in outside of the episodes. And yeah, this is still like super kind of fluid, and we're still figuring out exactly what we want this to be. So if anything, if there's things you'd want us to talk about, or, you know, segments or ideas that you have for the overall structure of the show, like, we're really wanting to hear about that stuff. So yeah, send us an email or like hit us up over Twitter at Origin Story _ on Twitter, or at our email, the originstorypod@gmail.com.
Yeah, and you know, listen, we'll take feedback. Let us know if this worked. Send us an email, hit us up. And yeah, as Phil is saying, let us know if you want to hear more and what you would be interested in hearing. We've got a couple people that we're reaching out with on feelers to kind of talk about some other things, but yeah, would definitely take an email.
So with that, thanks for checking out this experiment, and hopefully we'll be doing more in the future. We will catch you all again on the next episode.
Bye.